When people talk about having a Dinosaur PC, they're probably not talking about this. This is the brand new M.Star 3 from Mloong, and it's one of the most unique PC cases I have ever seen from a manufacturer I've never heard of. And I gotta talk about it because I just built in it, and yeah, it's something quite special. See, this case is very unique. See, it's a full open air style case. So the front of it is completely exposed, the top is completely exposed, the back is completely exposed. You just have two side panels that really aren't real side panels, because as you guys can see, this tempered glass panel right here is open for the actual jaw of the dinosaur to allow plenty of air in, and there's really no dust prevention. I'll talk about that more later. But anyways, the outside of the rest of the design of this is a very similar concept to what I believe Cougar first introduced years back. Their case was a very similar concept. What they do is they take multiple panels and they kind of sandwich them together. So there's the two side panels, there's the main panel, which is where everything attaches to. So this is the panel where your motherboard screws into, as well as everything else. And then there's two more panels here. One of them is mainly just for center rigidity. And then this one here is to actually add kind of an extra layer, which helps with things like the radiator mount, as well as gives you a spot to actually mount that glass front panel. It's definitely very interesting and something you don't see every day. There's other manufacturers doing similar stuff, but just not like this, especially in this very unique kind of cutout, because you can do this in a lot of different styles, but they took a risk here, and I gotta commend them for that, because we are in an industry where PC cases are often just copycats of others, and doing something unique is definitely risky. But Mloong here, hey, they really impressed me with that. Now let's go ahead and talk about the actual support and design of this case. To do that, we're gonna go ahead and take off this last side panel. So let's go ahead and unscrew this guy. And pull the glass panel off. As you guys can see the real shape and cutout here. So we're just gonna go ahead and set this on the table. So inside the case, this is kind of the generalized layout. So everything is kind of tilted at an angle. This is about like a 30 to 40 degree angle. So everything kind of sits at that angle, including your radiator for your cooler, as well as the exact same angle for your GPU. It's kind of another different you take. I think it's very similar to how Alienware did some of their cases a while back. And as much as the problems I have with Alienware, it's kind of a cool concept to have everything kind of sit at that angle, and everything just looks a little different. Something really cool. Another thing that's interesting about this case is the fact that they decided to go M-ATX rather than a full-size ATX case. So you're going to be limited to either a micro ATX or a mini ATX motherboard. So that does limit you with your options. Fortunately, there have been a lot more micro ATX motherboards that have come out lately. So I was able to find a really cool one. This is one of the tough boards. So it's got a nice little orange aesthetic to match the kind of theme I did with this build, which is like a orange gunmetal and black theme. Yeah, and I absolutely love how that came out. As far as cooling support, up top, you have a 240 millimeter radiator mount. It is a little tight. So if you do have a larger radiator, so something like a Liquid Freezer 3, probably won't fit here. I was able to go ahead and fit one of the new IQ Link coolers from Corsair. That was fine. It was just a little tight with the actual controller here. And then something that's weird with the rear mount for the 120 millimeter fan is the fact that you can't really mount it on this side. It doesn't really work well for two reasons. One, they don't want it there. They actually pushed that panel forward to make sure that you could actually fit your rear fan on the outside of the case. The reason they did this is this allows you to actually see the cutout of the same kind of dinosaur shape that you have with the tempered glass panel into the actual frame there for where that mounts. Really cool and different than pretty much anything out there, which is something that I'm going to repeat a lot about this case because it's not like a lot out there. Outside of that, everything else is pretty standard. You do have plenty of length for your GPU if you do have that concern. And then the only thing I would say is the power supply mount is a little weird. You can only mount with your power supply fan up. The reason for this is there's really no ventilation on the bottom. So that's just something to keep in mind. And you're not going to want to have a really long power supply. I went for probably one of the shorter power supplies on the market. Fortunately, that's kind of the way most power supplies have gone these days. This is an 850 watt unit. And that was still kind of a tight fit. because it actually pushes underneath, and there's only a single channel down there to actually route the cables, which I'll get to later because building in it was a little difficult. Outside of that, the actual rest of the design, very simple. Like I said, it's kind of a copycat of those cases that Cougar was putting out a long time ago. I'll try to find an image of those so you guys can see what I'm talking about, where it's that sandwich design. But everything else, it's just kind of an open air style. And I love how everything kind of just comes together with the multiple pieces, and it gives this really cool effect. Now that we know about the design, let's talk about actually building this case, because you actually have to assemble this case as it comes flat packed. This is not the first case by any means that I've had to actually test out doing this, including the Inwin POC as well as the Cube from Cooler Master. Both of those came flat packed, and they were actually really cool concepts. The POC, you actually didn't have to put any screws in. It actually would fold together. And the Cube actually had very minimal screws to put together. That's not the case with this system. This thing had a ton of screws and was very complex to put together. And that's probably one of the biggest limitations of it. That and the fact that they don't give you instructions. At least those two cases either gave you an app or a very detailed guide on how to put it together. This one, there are no instructions in the box. And speaking of the box, I think my box was open because I noticed that there was actually a cut piece of tape when I was trying to open it up. I realized that it looked like somebody had taped it, cut it, and then retaped it again. So I don't know if maybe they forgot to pack something or what the case was, but definitely a little weird, and something when you have a manufacturer you've never heard of is something I definitely want to talk about. But speaking of those instructions, the only thing they give you is you have to find the video, which you can only find on their Newegg listing, or if you go to their website. That's not gonna work for me. I really don't get it. And even then, if you try to search on YouTube, they have no SEO or anything that's helping them being listed there because they have no subscribers. They have almost no views on the video, so it's so hard to find it if you want to search for it. So the only way I could find it was to go to the Newegg listing, click on the video there, and then watch it. It's a 6-minute video that's kind of sped up. During that time, they give you a layout of what screws and things that you have to actually assemble. And then there's a guy basically putting it together. No words, a single angle, and it's not easy to really follow. It's a 6-minute video, but it took me like 45 minutes to put this case together because it was so confusing on how they wanted things laid out. There was really no clear direction. You couldn't always see what direction the tabs were facing or what specific screws or how they wanted things put together. Yeah, it was not a great tutorial, and it's something that's a big limitation with this case. Just give us instructions. Don't have to make a video about it. Really, just make it easy on us. People can follow them, or make the actual video with words so we can follow along, or at least some kind of transcript. They really could improve that, and I hope they do, because this right now is a great case. It's just a pain to put together. But that's not my only issue with putting it together, though. When putting it together, yeah, they use some really cheap hardware. The case is built out of an aluminum and steel alloy. For the most part, it's either aluminum or steel across the entire thing besides the tempered glass side panel. And it's really, really nice feeling. It's a nice, very nice material, and I do appreciate that. But they use cheap screws. I was putting it together. I sheared off a screw, putting one in. Yeah, that really shouldn't happen when you're assembling a case. We're sending out a case that's gonna be assembled by people, or taken apart or whatever they're gonna have to do to it. You shouldn't give cheap screws that are just gonna shear off when they're used. That's something they need to fix, and that's super easy to improve. Just don't give us cheap screws to begin with. And also, if most of these screws could have been toolless, were thumb screws, there is definitely the option for that. There's plenty of room in the areas where they need to be screwed in, and it wouldn't be a problem with the aesthetic. It would just make it easier for the end consumer to really put this together. But they kind of missed out on that there. Now that we've talked about the issues and the experience I had with actually putting this case together, let's talk about actually building in it, because that's probably the thing that you'll have to do more than once that you end up keeping this case. That's something that's really gonna be make or break for a lot of people. Because once it's built, that can take a while, but putting it together, you want it to be easy. This case is good, not great. See, putting it together, not bad. It's a fairly easy case to work in just because it's very open. When you have the tempered glass panel off, there's a lot of room to actually reach your hand in there to kind of like get to some tougher angles that you can't do in a traditional case, which I do appreciate, and it's nice to have when you have an open style case. My only problem was when I was actually wiring the actual case and putting in the AIO and fans. So my plan was I was going to use the IQ Link system from Corsair. So I had the IQ Link AIO up top, and then I was going to have a fan in the rear. The problem with that, because of the design layout where they actually have the fan on the outside of the case, which is very unique. So basically that rear fan sits on the outside instead of like on the inside on most cases. I couldn't have that fan there because the connector sat on top, which I wouldn't have been able to plug into. And because the LEDs are only on one side, it wasn't going to make sense if I rotated the fan. So I just had to switch that fan out. So that was a little bit of a pain. And then I would also say wiring the case is a pain too, because there's really no room for cable management on this back side. On the back side, if I take this panel off, I basically have to lay the case down to squish all the cables back down, especially because I'm using extensions. There is almost no room back there. It is very thin, and even then, there aren't a lot of tie down points, which very much limits the ability for you to actually cable manage the back of the case. And speaking of getting those cables even back there, because of how the power supply is laid out in its own kind of area down here, the cables actually have to run out of that power supply and then out to a very, very small hole and then out, and that's where you can kind of spread them out from there. That is not ideal, and honestly, it was so hard to actually get those cables through that I was kind of worried I was going to accidentally unplug something. So they could definitely widen that a little bit. There was no reason they couldn't. I know it may be a rigidity issue, or give us a second area for those cables to pass through. I don't know. They just need to figure something out, because that is not ideal, and a lot of people aren't going to like that, and it's probably going to turn people to return this in the long run. Outside of that, the rest of the assembly process was not too bad, but really the main issues I had here were there's a lack of cable management. There's not a great option there. And then because there's no cable management, this kind of resulted in some design issues I didn't like, is the fact that on the back panel, which has this solid panel, there's a mesh on here, which is like glued in place. It's not even like a magnetic mesh. They're calling this a dust filter. It's not really a dust filter. It's not going to prevent anything. There's no fans actually coming in there. All the dust is just going to get inside of your case. That's really just going to be a fact about having an open case. But because of that, this really cheap material that they're using kind of gets bowed out and stretched because we have those actual cables there being pushed down. So because there's nowhere to actually route those cables, they have to sit there and they end up pushing on the mesh, which has already started to stretch it, and I just built this system today. That is not ideal at all. And speaking of this dust filter on the back of the case, if you do own this case or you end up buying it to actually use it, just know you're going to need to be cleaning your PC all the time. It's going to get absolutely filthy. There is not an area in this case that's not exposed. So really, you're just going to have to clean your case a lot, and you're probably just going to have to do it every month. That's just something you're going to have to keep in mind. There's nothing preventing dust from getting in. There's no dust filters. This is not a dust filter. It's not even probably good enough to prevent any dust getting inside the system. It's just going to fall right down on it. It's going to get on your GPU, all your other components, which is fine. Just keep your system clean. Keep the maintenance up, and you probably won't have any problems. But you do also have a fully exposed case, which means if you have pets like cats, that's definitely something going to be a concern. Also, because it's an exposed case, you also have to be concerned with things like a higher chance of like liquid damage getting inside of here. So if somebody accidentally spills something, the case is fully exposed. There is nothing preventing water from getting inside. Same thing when it comes to if somebody's sticking their hand in there, you can stick your hand inside of this case without a problem and accidentally touch something you're not supposed to and cause some issues. There's just a lot of those types of issues when you have like an open style case that you just need to keep in mind. And it's just one thing I wanted to share with you. Even though I found plenty of issues and things I wasn't a huge fan of with this case, I still gotta say, it is so cool and so unique. Where else are you gonna get a dinosaur head PC case? I don't know, but maybe you can make one yourself, but it's just so cool. And I just absolutely love it. Honestly, this system might even become my personal rig. I have to think about it, but yeah, it's so cool just to have this unique style that nobody else has, at least at this time. And there's just something about it that just feels really special. With that said, a unique case comes at a price. And this one is very expensive at $180, which if you're buying a case at $180, that is already a very premium tier. Usually on $180, that is the top of the line cases out there. Those are flagship cases that you are buying against. So it really has to be something special. I'm not sure if it's worth that. I get why they did it. There's a lot of material here. They did a nice steel construction. It's steel and aluminum, which is really nice and something you don't see unless you're on that higher tier. But you still have to assemble it yourself. They ship it flat pack, so it's going to be cheaper for them. But yeah, I think it should be closer to like 150 at that price point. I do think I could recommend it a little bit more. But at $180, it's expensive. But if you want a dinosaur head PC case, where else are you gonna get one? So maybe that's why you're paying for it. So with that said, do I recommend it and do I think you should buy it? Well, probably not. There are a lot of better PC cases out there, especially at that price point or any price point. That are going to be better for both dust, airflow, as well as give you a much easier building experience. But if you want something truly unique that nobody else has, hey, this is it. And that's why I picked it up. With that said, if you do want to go ahead and check out this case, I'll go ahead and have links for you guys down below, as well as all the other parts used in the system. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a like, subscribe for more content like this, and check out this video here of a recent case review I did of the Phanteks XT Pro. It's one of the best budget cases at only $60. You should really check it out.